Chapter 14. Friday, late afternoon. Still chuckling at her grandmother, Doreen walked toward the creek with her goodies. "Good thing Nan is feeding us," she said. "Once I realized it could be months and months before I get any of that auction money from Nan's antiques, I hesitated to shop for groceries anymore." As she walked back toward the property near the river's mouth, where the ice fishing pick had been unearthed, she looked around and smiled. She could see the ivy on the other side of the privacy fence where she'd found the ice pick. She guessed that probably at least a 10-year growth took place to completely fill the fence. She stopped and wondered just who lived on the other side of the fence. She frowned as she tried to count the number of houses down from the lake itself, so she could look on Google Maps and then potentially search BC Assessment and get a house address, but ultimately, it would take Mac to figure out who lived here now, or back a decade or so ago. And of course, just because somebody lived there at any time, didn't mean they had anything to do with the ice pick found nearby. As she walked back to her house and put her precious food cargo on the kitchen table, her phone rang. She pulled it out and smiled. "Hi, Mac. I was just thinking about calling you." "So either you want something or you're in trouble," he said. She frowned at her phone. "Or maybe I just wanted to offer you some more fresh veggies," she snapped. "Maybe," he said, "but not likely. You need to be eating them yourself. I just came back from Nan's and she sent me home with a pepper and a couple tomatoes, fresh green beans and more lettuce, so I can make a big salad for dinner if I'm hungry. I just finished some excellent zucchini bread," she said with a happy sigh. "Darn," Mac said in an envious voice. "Now you've got my mouth salivating." "Ha," she said, "then I won't tell you that Nan sent me home with the bulk of a whole loaf too." "Now that's just cruel," he whined. "Did you have a reason for calling me?" she said cheekily. "Maybe I'll put on the tea kettle and sit down and have yet another slice." "You're really being mean now," he said. She laughed. "Maybe, but I did figure out who owned the ice pick." First came silence on the other end, then Mac said, "You did?" "I did," she said proudly. She proceeded to explain everything she'd found out so far. "That's not bad for an afternoon's work," Mac said. "Right now, of course, I'd like to figure out who lives in the house next to where I found the ice pick, which is something you could look up for me. And potentially, I need to find Ed Burns's heir and see how that ice pick went from Ed's private collection to outside the fence of this particular property at the river's mouth." "So, do you have a number on that second tin piece?" Mac asked. An odd note was in his voice. "What do you mean?" "The metal piece I don't have a tool for." "Yes," he said. "What's the number on it?" She ran it off for him. "Interesting," he said. "It's mentioned in one of my cases." "This actual tool?" "No, somebody said something, but never mind." "I might just stop by and have a slice of that zucchini bread," he said, "and take a picture of your ledgers." Immediately, her antennae went up. "So you do think I'm onto something?" "Well, you're onto something," he said in a dismissive manner. "But, of course, it's probably nothing important." "Now that's cruel," she complained. "I could be onto something really good." He chuckled. "Did you ever find out what happened to the parents?" "The Darbunkles," he said. "They were declared dead 7 years after they were filed as missing persons." "So they went missing after they moved back east?" "Who told you that?" "Wendy and Nan. Plus Millicent and the librarian. It's the popular rumor that the parents moved back east, probably with Henrietta," she said. "And, did you also know Henrietta was adopted? And that her birth family lived in Kelowna too, and then they moved south into the Penticton area after they gave her up at a very young age?" Again Mac went silent on the other end before swearing lightly. "You probably shouldn't swear," she corrected. He chuckled. "Hey, I'm comfortable with the cuss words I use. And I hope I'm not making you feel uncomfortable when I say them." But you're the one figuring out if you could get these words out of your mouth, he said. Have you been practicing? Well, you know I really don't like to even think about my former husband or my life with him. That's my past, and it's best for it to stay back there. But I did come to realize about the time I was moving here, how my ex had me under such tight controls, as to what I wore, what I weighed, what I could eat, what I could say when allowed to speak. It's another form of abuse, verbal abuse, an abuse of my personal rights and freedoms. So, once I broke away from him, physically at first and then mentally later, I did feel a certain very grand freedom in finding out who I was in reality, in being the real me, even able to say what I thought, with a curse word or two thrown in for added emphasis if needed. Granted, I have my own self-imposed limits on that. I got as far as fudge and fenster and fudgy winkles, she said, but I can't get that F word out. At that, Mac laughed. I really like fudgy winkles. The next time you get angry, upset, or under attack, I suggest you scream at the top of your lungs, fudgy winkles. Doreen glared into her phone. Here you are making fun of me again, even though I would share my zucchini bread with you. I'll be there in 10, he said. Don't eat it all. And he hung up on her. Doreen smiled, looked down at the critter collection around her, and said, Guess what, guys? Mac is coming. Muggs woofed and turned around in circles at her feet. She smiled and walked into the garage, wondering if she could clean out some extra stuff before he got here. Just because she could park her vehicle in the garage didn't mean a ton of room had been cleared for it. She had a few more things to take down to Wendy's, and some recycling that maybe should go directly to charity. She checked her watch, but there wasn't enough time now. Later, she promised herself. I'll take more stuff to the charity later. She had almost all the house cleaned up and clutter-free, except for the last bits in her bedroom, and that was such a good feeling. She'd cleaned up all this space on both floors of her house and had solved the latest cold case, creating a void in her life. How perfect that another mystery had dropped in to fill it right away. As far as she was concerned, that was perfect timing. Then Mac called again. Grain check was all he said,